welcome everyone. I'm really glad you could all join us this Friday morning. Feels very timely to be having a conversation about rewilding as we come towards the end of the COP negotiations up in Glasgow happening right now. Because the human impact on the world is absolutely undeniable. We've got dramatic losses of wildlife, and we're all very aware of the impacts of climate on both nature and on humanity. But rewilding, is it part of the solution? And we've got a fantastic panel of speakers here this morning to talk to us about that. And they're going to introduce you to some incredible projects and people who are helping reverse that trend in the loss of nature and help turning around the climate crisis that we face. So no further ado, we're going to jump straight to our lovely speakers. And Peter, could I ask you to introduce yourself first and tell us a few words about your work? Thanks.
Sorry, somebody had muted me. Good morning, Helen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pete Cairns. My rather pretentious title is Executive Director of Scotland, The Big Picture. We're a rewilding charity based up in the Cairns in the Highlands of Scotland. I guess in terms of what we do four things. We do four things. We drive support for rewilding in a whole range of different ways. We commit more land to rewilding through our Northwoods Rewilding Network, which is made up of a number of land partners from all different sectors, actually, from farming, from crofting, from community woodlands, even schools, actually, all committed to nature restoration. We work to return missing species. We've got a couple of projects on the go at the moment for cranes and for lynx. And we also work to develop more rewilding enterprise to make rewilding pay. I think we all recognise that in order for rewilding to become a economically viable and legitimate land use, we need to give it some economic credibility and foundation. So that's really what we do. Yeah, scotlandbigpicture.com for anybody else that's interested in what we do. Yeah, that's me for now.
Super, thanks, Pete. So from the wilds of Scotland down to Devon, Julian, could we come to you next?
Hi, sure. I'm Julian Carnell. I'm the director of a charity, the Sharpham Trust, which owns and cares for an estate about 550 acres on the banks of the River Dart near Totnes in South Devon. The mission of the charity is to try and connect people to the natural world. So we're as equally interested in humans as we are in wildlife and nature. We've got a heritage lottery funded project in partnership with Ambios. My colleague Simon is here today as well. The aims of the project are to rewild the estate, but also to engage people in that process, because we don't think we can affect real change unless we talk to people. That's it.
Thanks, Julian. And Simon, would you like to tell us more about your work?
Oh, that's very kind. Hello, everybody. Yes, just following on from Julian there. My name is Simon, and I'm one of the Ambios team. We're a not-for-profit company, be 21 years old next year, and we do nature conservation training. So we actually deliver practical skills-based training to career changers, young people wanting to get into what we call the sector, by which we generally mean working with wildlife in some form or other, either in a communications role or in a survey and monitoring role, a practical doing things role. And we are active on the Sharpham estate as a tenant of the Sharpham estate, rewilding 50 acres of land. And we're now about 18 months, probably about 20 months into that process right now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Ivan, can we come to you now?
Hi everyone, my name's Ivan de Clay and I work at the Knepp estate. My pretty pretentious job title is Rainbow Chaser. So it's I look at things like natural capital, landscape recovery through corridors and farmer clusters. I do some rewilding consultancy and trying to understand the future of funding for new rewilding projects, not just Knepp. The Knepp estate, for those of you who don't know, is a rewilding project in the southeast and West Sussex, and has been running for around 20 years and is essentially a very interesting rewilding science experiment. A lot of learning has come out from NEP through a lot of monitoring, but Charlie Burrell and Izzy, the owners, don't sit still, so are looking further afield now at things like nature corridors down to the coast, farmer clusters, trying to inform the rewilding future by understanding what happens with carbon here so that we can enter the market and stop things being, you know, primarily focused on various different types of carbon sequestration and ignoring this type, and trying to answer those questions. So less focus so much on NEP itself, but looking at how the NEP experience can help other projects develop.
Brilliant, thanks Ivan. And from rainbow chasing to beaver bothering, can we come to you next, Derek, please?
Well, I don't have any job titles. I'm just a grunt, and there's no rain here. It's sitting. I'm sitting in the rain, and it's lashing down. I'm rewilding about 300 acres of land I own here. We're also involved in a whole range of captive breeding projects for things like water voles, which, despite everything we know and have done, are slipping through our fingers fast. So, I mean, my role is to use what land we have here as an example of what can be done, and to make what progress can be made with species that are literally clinging to a fragile existence in Britain at this point in time.
Thanks, Derek. I'm going to jump straight into some questions. We've had some questions that have been submitted in advance, and then people who've joined us this morning, please do use the chat function to feed in further questions as we go. But Derek, if I could start with you, rewilding, is it just a fad or is it the future?
It's absolutely the future. 23 million acres of Britain are farmed, and that's degraded, land that's degraded in all sorts of different ways. Sure, there are examples of it being used well, but when you spend much time going out to look at other estates, as Ivan and I did last week, the thing that is truly staggering about it is the depth of the death. What you've got are fragments of living environment everywhere, fragments of species, some of which, like the lapwings we saw clustered on a tiny island last Monday, are birds that haven't bred for the last 4 years and are just eking out their existence, dying without producing any babies at all. And that's the best of it. Those birds are still there. There is no future for nature other than rewilding, and there is no future for rewilding other than, you know, animals like the beaver that start to transcend in any way we can understand the idea that we're just adding another species to the list of what's here, that positively take land and as a force of nature start to return it to an environment where other species can flourish and prosper. These are mountains we have to climb. We have to overcome them quickly because time's short and the situation is desperate.
And Ivan, you've seen a huge transformation in the 20 years that NEP's been rewilding, haven't you? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, 20 years ago, this was an intensive arable farm. You know, so it's very heavy clay here, and Charlie, having studied intensive agriculture and modern agriculture at university, came back and he did his best for 20 years. But this type of ground, as Derek said, was very degraded. Ecologically, the soils were degraded. It was just not the right place to be putting crops in the ground. And reinstating natural processes, setting the project up, bringing in the herbivores that drove the system. In the last 15, 20 years, we've seen the most extraordinary recovery of wildlife, ranging from floral diversity all the way up to various mammals, invertebrates, pollinating species, pollinating insects, everything you can imagine, apart from sadly the lapwing that Derek referenced there, because this type of habitat doesn't fit that type of bird. So again, with what Derek's saying, I feel like we need projects like these all across the country where you let natural processes dictate the direction of where the land's going to go, and then we'll have a mosaic of mosaic habitats across across the landscape, providing corridors and natural systems for everything that we have left. It's hard to sum up NEP or any rewilding project that's been running for 20 years in a couple of minutes, but imagine somewhere with very little life, and now imagine somewhere with lots and lots and lots of life, and very little management. There's been very little to do with human beings in that system. It's all been driven by processes, and there are still processes missing. Beavers, predators, there are still things that this place could be even more rich if we allowed those processes to run the way they would run without our interference, really.
Yeah, and you picked up a really important point there about kind of the role of humans within rewilding. Pete, I wonder if you could maybe talk to that. You know, what role should humans play within rewilding projects? You're on mute.
Somebody keeps putting me on mute. I don't know why, but anyway, yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, rewilding really is 10% ecology and 90% psychology. We know how to do the physical stuff. We didn't 25 years ago, but we do now. The greater challenge, of course, lies with people and their hearts and minds, their attitudes, their perceptions, their values, their motivations in life. So, you know, a huge part of what we do is try and engage with people and to try and disentangle this sort of Gordian knot that we have around land use and land management in the UK. And that's a process, it's a journey, it doesn't happen overnight. I think, you know, I often draw an analogy between rewilding as a movement and other social movements, like, for example, racism. That's a journey that took root 50 years ago, perhaps 40 years ago, and is still evolving and maturing today. And I think rewilding is no different. This is a long journey whereby we require as a society a fundamental philosophical shift in our relationship with nature, a reimagining of that relationship. So that, you know, and that trips off the tongue, but it's not a quick or easy job. So for me, people are right at the heart of this in terms of dictating the direction and speed of rewilding, but also deriving the benefits from it ultimately.
Super, thank you. And you know, we can't rewild everywhere, obviously. Is there an ideal ratio for naturalness versus human landscapes? Julian, would you like to respond to that?
I don't think I'm best qualified on that, to be honest, but I just want to come on, just follow up what Peter says, and then I think Simon would be good to speak on that point. And I just want to echo what Peter was saying. At Sharpham, many of us here today will have been involved in nature conservation for probably decades, I hesitate to say. And why are we still talking about the same issues? And we need to stop and think about that. And the problem, the biodiversity crisis is a symptom, and it's a symptom of problems in the wider society, and those are people problems. And we need to be asking ourselves as a society some difficult questions. The question about is it a fad or is it the future is really, when you think about it, a bit daft, because we cannot separate ourselves from nature. The very fact that many of us are often saying that, I think, is indicative of the problem, really, because it is pretty self-evident, and yet we've created a society where people are separated out, and that is the root of the problem. And then when you look at other indicators, for example, there aren't very accurate figures, but something like last year, something like 6 million people in England were prescribed antidepressants. These sorts of things don't seem to be talked about much and joined up, but I would say that there's a connection between some of the issues we're facing in society and the way we're treating the natural world. And we need to bring those things together, and that's what we're trying to do at Sharpham. But I think Simon would be really good to speak about, does size matter?
Happy to do that. Just agree with you know, everything that's been said so far. Yeah, not a fad. Got a little illustration of that. We currently hold the Devon Rewilding Network, and which started 3 months ago and already has nearly 300 people from a whole broad range of different backgrounds. So I think, you know, just following on from what Julian was saying, you know, if we allow people to connect, if we facilitate those connections, then folk respond, and it does go back to that the breakdown in the relationship between human beings and nature that Julian alluded to. There are figures around about you know, what we want to achieve or what we'd like to see in terms of rewilding. I think we have to just get on and do as much as we can, to be honest. And you know, we are a small scale. We are a relatively small scale rewilder. We haven't touched on what rewilding actually means, and perhaps we should come back to that at some point. If we're talking about making space for nature, and as Ivan said, you know, just experiencing places where there wasn't much, and now suddenly there is a lot and it's growing. You know, these are the kinds of things that we need to do. We've got, if we imagine nature as a silken woven tapestry, what we've been doing over many generations is removing the threads of that tapestry, and it's about to collapse catastrophically. But we can rethread those silken threads by rewilding. We can start to bring back, Derek, Ivan mentioned, you know, remnant populations. We can make space for nature. We can begin to reinstall. We do have the techniques, Peter was saying. We just need to get on and do it, and at whatever scale, because it's Chris Hoy, you know, Olympic cyclist, spoke about marginal gains. And I think, you know, while we can get really big gains also in some of these really large scale rewilding projects, for us, you know, down at Sharpham, we're part of the marginal gain economy there. So we're smaller scale, but we're getting gains. And together, collectively, big projects and small, can really, really make a difference to this ecological crisis that we are now facing. And we see it on the ground. The thing about why rewilding isn't a fad is because you can see it happening, and it gives people hope. You know, we have residential trainees that are around for 12 weeks. During their time with us, they can actually see the wildlife beginning to return. And you know, this gives people hope. This is something that is, it's a snowball, describing the other day, a snowball that's gone over the top of the hill. You know, we're starting to roll down the hill and gain momentum now. And we need to keep going with it at whatever scale, whether that's in your window box or in your garden or on a small holding or on a farm in the corners that you can spare, or is that on a place like the Sharpham estate, or is it at Knepp, or is it at Derek's place?
I love that analogy, repairing the tapestry. Very powerful visual image there. So questions come in. You've all talked about kind of, you know, the role of rewilding's a movement, and everybody has a part to play within that movement. Has anyone on the panel got ideas for how communities or towns or educational settings could get involved?
Okay, I can pop back on that. I mean, there are a number, I'm sure panel members will share, a number of emerging projects now that are looking at being able to help this concept, this idea embed within educational system. We know there's a GCSE currently being discussed in natural history. We've got a tiny project looking at how we can facilitate learning materials for teachers in primary schools around rewilding. There are other examples coming down the line. Community involvement, community access, all part of where we want to go with rewilding. So there are sort of some specific projects there, I suppose, and then there's this general idea of spreading the word. And, you know, we have this nearly 300 member community just in Devon, and I know there are other county rewilding networks that are popping up now across Yorkshire, I'm aware, you know, adjacent counties, Wiltshire, Somerset, all over. So again, it goes back to the original question, is this a fad? I don't think so. I think we're off and running now. Anyway.
Any other
Helen,
panelists? Yeah, sorry, come in.
I just want to, I've got another hat where I'm a school governor, and I think, you know, young people are really important, and there is a lot we could be doing in terms of the schools, the curriculum, the formal and non-formal stuff. People who are as old as me will remember when a lot more used to be going on, and a lot of this really positive activity in terms of getting young people out in nature has been lost over the years. And we can debate why that is. Well, we need to try and recapture some of that. It is really important to get people out and experience. The more experiential things that can happen, the more change we will see.
Helen, if I could maybe just very quickly chip in here. You know, we use this term ecological blindness, and you know, we would all recognise the term baseline. We would all recognise a term that I can't even remember.
Shifting baseline syndrome.
That's the one. Shifting baseline syndrome. Thank you for that. And you know, there's a sort of a generational amnesia that has set in, whereby each new generation accepts the landscape and celebrates it, actually, that they're born into, irrespective of how impoverished it might be. So we end up in this downward spiral of expectation. And I think one of the things, as has been alluded to, that rewilding represents hope for an antidote to that downward spiral, and actually turn that around, arrest and reverse those declines that we not only tolerate and accept as normal, in some perverse situations actually end up paying for. So we've got to come up with a cure to this ecological blindness, and education at a school level plays a significant part in that.
Well, thanks, Pete. And for those people in communities or within a school who want to get started on their small-scale rewilding project, where do they start? Are there any kind of resources or toolkits that we can point them to?
No, I don't think there are, and I think this is a real issue. I think the idea that we started. I mean, Izzy's book, looking at how you rewild or regarden smaller areas of land, change the structure, use sedges, bring the landscape up, put in ponds, put in log piles, put in rock piles, all the things that are good wildlife gardening, reintroduce glowworms, reintroduce harvest mice. There's a lot that people can do, and people have to be enabled to do things. We've got to a stage now where, just picking up on Simon's point about, rewilding, putting cattle in, putting pig, whatever, and wildlife coming back, we've got to realize a lot of wildlife is not going to come back. It's not there anymore. And there are great complications with some of the things there are. We're just beginning to come to terms with the fact, for example, that birds have cultures. And once you knock out the culture in a population of birds, though they can fly, there is nothing telling those redshanks to go back to the banks of the river, where they came from, once that population with that culture is gone. And we don't know how to restore that. We don't know so much. We have tools and we have knowledge, but the scale of the challenge that's facing us is quite simply enormous. And it's a challenge that is not a British challenge. If you look at Carl Jones's work, with the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation and the rebuilding of whole coral atolls, starting with a tiny skink at the bottom and a tiny palm accompanying the tiny skink, that's exactly where we are. We're looking at a landscape that has been largely destroyed and of its own volition left to its own devices now, even with the architects in it. Okay, NEP shows that remarkable things can happen, and that's all valid. But there is, when you look at the pools of creatures that are left in these landscapes, they're so small and they're so fragile that there is no guarantee that if you leave it and you get the architects in place, that they are going to return, especially if you're working with areas of land that are relatively small. And that's, of course, where networks of all sorts come in, be they schools, people's gardens, smaller farms, whatever else.
I'll just add a little bit on the definition of rewilding and scale there. Because rewilding on the big scale, as far as we use it at NEP, is long-term minimum intervention process-led area. The word itself, because of the hope that it encapsulates, whether that's through Izzy's book or these discussions, has come to actually evolve in meaning. And it really, in certain places, which tends to be on the smaller scale, it really means making things wilder. It's not reinstating natural processes, because you can't necessarily do that in your garden. What you're doing is making it wilder, which is a fantastic thing. That evolution is, in most cases, great. It can lead to confusion, but that's a separate issue. And what that means is, on the smaller scale, when you think about rewilding, you're not thinking about giant herbivores because you can't have them. You're thinking more about management, or, as Derek said, just put in a pond, or cut down a tree, or just replicating natural processes on that smaller scale. At NEP, we still replicate predation. We have to cull. That's our main intervention. In your garden, you might replicate browsing. You might replicate a wild boar with your trowel. Instead of traditional conservation, which is managing for a specific output, this is, what would nature be doing in my garden? Let's see if I can copy it. And so the definition changes the smaller you get, but it all is rewilding in my opinion. And as Derek says, therefore your community gardens or your community, they are stepping stones for God knows what species, but various things. So getting everyone engaged has a huge value. And there are initiatives like Wild East in East Anglia, where you've got big rewilding projects and garden projects listed on the same map. And we're going to try and do something for Sussex down here, where everyone can sort of shout about what they're doing. It empowers everyone from the landed aristocracy estate owner on one end to the community garden in Brighton on the other end of the ownership scale, that is. And it can be a very powerful thing, so that if you're about to start a project, you can look on the map or wherever it is and go, oh, look, these guys are doing something, maybe we can collaborate. And that's landscape scale connectivity, and it's at the beginning of its journey. I mean, I know people on this group have been doing it for a lot longer than I have, but it's gaining traction, and so hopefully everyone can do rewilding at any scale, really.
And the policy landscape that we're in has changed dramatically in the last couple of years post Brexit. What hope do you as panelists have for is the new Environment Act going to be good for rewilding? Is the new Environmental Land Management Scheme going to be good for rewilding?
I can try. So I was reading the chat questions as we go along. There's so many good ones coming in. Helen, is elms going to be good for rewilding?
Yeah.
Unknown. I'm sure Derek will have some proper opinion on this because he knows better than I. I don't know, to be honest. It will go in some form because it's trendy and interesting. I think there'll be a huge appetite for it. People on this group elsewhere, and therefore I think the payments will go down because they won't be able to afford all the things that are going to want to be done. So I don't know if it's going to be very lucrative, and I don't know how DEFRA will get their heads around process-led stuff. I mean, English Nature took a big jump with NEP, but it's very difficult to change a target-based way of thinking. So we will continue to lobby and work on trying to build in that open-mindedness, and we've gone some way towards it, but I wouldn't put all your eggs in the elms basket, let's put it that way.
Derek, you've been shaking your head vigorously. Do you want to?
I'm much more nervous and on the fence than Derek, so it's good that he's here. Oh, you're on mute,
Derek.
Right. Well, obviously, Ivan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ivan and I met last Monday. We had a very interesting morning with Packington Estate up near Coventry. We discussed the financial base for many of the decisions that are going to be made. And Ivan may disagree with me, where, sitting there, you listen to it and you think, this is very opaque. But what we do know is the farm subsidies as are going. That's it, they're gone. And whatever happens from here on in, it is going to be down to individuals of all sorts. And this comes back to your imaginative, constructive gardeners and your children and your landowners to look at where they are and prepare for what's about to happen. And what's about to happen is you're going to have to be very, very nifty on your feet, very adaptable, very determined to see your project through. That I would suggest is going to apply to everybody from Nepcastle to me to the RSPB as well, Helen. It's going to be a different environment. Are we prepared for this? I've had a lot to do with government and bureaucracy when it comes to species and thinking for years. And I was having a chat in the bath yesterday, though he wasn't in the bath with me, with Roy Dennis about capercaillie in Scotland. He tells me that we're still talking about this bird and talking about doing more research and more modelling and more scoping. And they're basing all this work on the idea that there's 1,000 birds left. And he said the people in the room are telling them there's 250. Pete might know more about this, but I honestly don't think we have in any way, from an institutional point of view, really grasped this nettle. There's no sense of urgency. Utterly complacent in the main. It takes way too long for decisions to be made, and there's way too much postponing when it comes to action. I think we are beginning to understand what we're going to have to do, but we are very ill prepared. And I also think that everything is going to be changed by individuals. It's going to be people taking ideas and running with them and creating a pace that is so fast, like NEP as an organisation, and like the best of the other people we know, that those following behind are going to have to play catch up with the example that individuals set. And that, I'm afraid, is going to be critical.
You've touched upon there, Derek, on the role of reintroductions, and that's one of the questions that came in advance is, should we be considering the reintroduction of more keystone species, particularly the reintroduction of predator species, and how would this fit? Pete, I wondered if you wanted to talk to that a bit.
Well, I think the discussion around large predators is really no different to the discussion around capercaillie. Derek's absolutely right. The system, the establishment, call it what you will, is paralysed by process and by fear. And the result of that is that inertia sets in. There are exceptions, and the narrative is changing. But again, you know, I come back down to this being a people issue. Lynx and even wolves could make a good living in Scotland tomorrow. Ecologically speaking, it's not even a conversation. It's an absolute no-brainer. The obstacles are people obstacles, political, social, cultural, economic obstacles. So, you know, again, it comes back down to rewilding being 10% ecology and 90% psychology. Should we be having the conversation? Yes, because I think, you know, what we all agree on is that the completeness and functionality of ecosystems is going to give us the ultimate optimacy. That is what we're heading for. So all of the components in that ecological engine have to be present. Having said that, we could waste an enormous amount of time and energy debating about things that we don't necessarily agree on with other sectors, where there is a lot of low-hanging fruit in the middle about things we do agree on, and let's get on with that. So, you know, if a journalist rings me up about rewilding, I always say, do you want to talk about wolves? And if they say yes, then I know that they're angling for a fight, and I just say no, because there's so much more ground to cover in terms of habitat restoration, in terms of less contentious species reintroduction, before we even go to large predators. So absolutely part of the conversation, but let's not get bogged down with rewilding being synonymous with the return of wolves.
Can I just say one thing without wishing to monopolise this? I think by the time you look at the statement from the CEO of SNH 4 weeks ago to say, we're not here to talk about wolves, we're here to talk about hoverflies, we have a big problem. You know, what we need is an independent voice here that's saying we are for nature, and we are going to talk about these things, and we're going to look sanely and sensibly at what's happening in the Netherlands, where they're killing people's pet kangaroos and creating strands of stress you would never even think of. These conversations have to be had. At the end of it all, if we're going to move to this low carbon future that the government tells us we're going to attain, and in doing so we're going to plant more forests of whatever sort, we know what those deer are going to do to them. And we know that we don't frighten them, and we can't make them move. The conversation will have to turn to predators at some stage, and it's got to be a sensible, well-informed one. And I can see no problem whatsoever about that starting now.
And what role can rewilding play in helping us face up to the climate crisis? Any views on that from our panelists? Ivan, maybe?
Well, Julian was about to speak, so I'll say
sorry,
something
Julian,
afterwards.
you go.
I just wanted to follow on from what was just said there, and I think a really important issue is that the people with power who are making decisions, they don't approach things in a joined up way. They tend to operate in little areas that concern them, and when you're trying to address an issue like the biodiversity crisis, climate change, mental health, poverty, I could go on. These things are joined up, and therefore you need some joined up thinking, some holistic approach. So if you are saying quite rightly that we're 1 minute to midnight, then you've then got to join that up with other actions and statements to support. Otherwise, people will stop listening. They'll turn off. Turning to the specific question about global crisis, you can't separate these things out. They're all interlinked. And therefore, that's why I think at COP there was a nature day, wasn't there? And if you just stop back and think about that, it's potty, isn't it? We're going to have a day about nature, then we're going to have a day about something else, then we're going to have a day about something else. That is part of the problem.
Certainly agree with that, Julian. I think that splitting them out into two separate crises is futile. I mean, obviously the carbon and climate crisis goes a lot further because burning fossil fuels, and there are parts of it that are, I mean, they're still linked, still connected. But in terms of where rewilding fits with helping with the climate crisis, there are a million different things we don't know. And that's just webs of life, the ecosystem resilience, the strength of life in a healthy ecosystem will be fighting climate change in ways we don't know. What we do know is that in many of these natural habitats, we're sequestering carbon. We don't know all the numbers behind that yet, which is a problem, which is why we need to research, keep on learning, keep on measuring, because, you know, at the moment the carbon markets are stacked in favor of plantation woodlands, whether they're mixed deciduous or, you know, timber plantations, and beginning to be more so for peat, but there's still soil and natural regeneration and grasslands and wetlands. These are massive, massive habitats, massive carbon sinks that will obviously help sequestering carbon if we're restoring them from degraded landscapes. So that's one way. But then the resilience built into the system, and whether that's flood relief through storing land in these systems, you're building in a resilience for the inevitable changes that are coming. So having a natural and resilient landscape means that when the changes come, at least we'll be able to cope with them, because nature will be doing that coping for us. And then there are things that no one even considers. So the volume of biomass of carbon in the insects, birds, and mammals that live in these systems, that's all carbon too, that no one has yet been brave enough to incorporate into their modeling, because how on earth do you go about it? So that's what I mean about the stuff we don't know yet. And then soil, obviously, is the big one, whether it's through rewilding or regenerative farming or re-wetting. Our soils have the capacity to hold so much life and to hold so much carbon. You know, let's not get too bogged down in carbon, but yeah, so a lot would be my short version, Helen. Rewilding can do a lot in the climate crisis.
Great, thank you. Any other views on that from any of the panelists? Anything anyone wanted to add?
Helen, if I could just very, very quickly come back to the silo thinking that Julian was alluding to. That's very evident in Scotland and is really fundamental in this rewilding discussion. As a society, we seem to have got ourselves into the mindset that we have to choose between the needs of nature and the needs of people. It's a binary choice. We have nature or we have people. We can't possibly have both. That you know, fundamentally strikes at some of the philosophical questions we've been discussing. We have to dismantle that binary, that there is place and space for both. And I think, you know, it's a constant sort of cloud on the horizon, and really prejudices this debate in a negative way, and quite frankly just perpetuates this narrative of division between nature and people that Julian was talking about. Yeah, anyway, I thought that was great.
That really nicely links. One of the questions that we had that came in advance was, what does rewilding mean for how we relate to nature? So I think what I'm hearing is we need to stop thinking of ourselves as separate to it. Anyone want to respond to that question?
Absolutely, really important. You know, that, and I think there's a growing body of scientific evidence now that actually supports the idea that you get better and more diverse wildlife actually in certain circumstances where you have human interactions with that wildlife, and it's actually part of it. So that is building as a science base. But I think the interesting thing is the common thread I noticed coming through here is that we have a sense collectively as a panel perhaps of the thinking of others, and the thinking of others not being aligned with our thinking because it's binary, because it's siloed. So my sort of rhetorical question, or open question really, is, well, why is that? Why is it as a society that we have created what we perceive to be others who actually have a binary view, or tend to default to or find comfort in taking these things as piecemeal rather than connected? So you get things like, you know, there's a lot of excitement around research councils in higher education who actually come together from different, you know, you get social sciences and environmental sciences, and they work together, and that's really exciting because it's interdisciplinary. Why is it that we're creating these silos in our thinking and in our behaviour? Is that something to do with the education system in our country? Is that what's doing it? And what needs fixing there then? If we are thinking that a better way of approaching this is actually about bringing all these threads together and being able to think across disciplines, where does that thinking come from? Are we encouraging that in our children? Are we encouraging that down the education system? And if not, why not? What do we need to do about it?
Julian, I can see you nodding there. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, you know, at Sharpham we run a lot of retreats, mindfulness-based meditation retreats, and often built around nature connection. And what I see, there's something odd where people come to Sharpham and then they feel able to, they've got some space and they can start to reconnect. and it's almost like they've got to be given permission to do that, and by going somewhere different, that they feel they can. So we've created some kind of structures in society that are stopping or preventing people from being able to do that in their normal everyday lives. So we've got to try and invent ways to counteract that, and rewilding can be really powerful in that. There is an issue that when they come and they look out at the Devon landscape and they think, oh, it's brilliant, wonderful, beautiful, it's green, and of course there's an educational process to explain to them that just because it's green doesn't mean that it's not a bit of a biodiversity desert. So there is an educational, but first thing we've got to do is try and make spaces for people, to give them permission to reconnect, I think.
Helen, when I first came here in 2015, so 6 years ago, I live in Surrey, which is half an hour away, and relating to both Simon and Julian's point and Peter's point earlier from shifting baseline syndrome, I thought that my lovely Surrey Hills existence was lovely and nice and beautiful and full of life. And I came here and I heard a nightingale for the first time, and I heard cuckoos, which I hadn't heard since I was on holiday on the Isle of Mull, however many years before then. And I suddenly realized the baseline that I didn't have, the real baseline. Oh, you know, who knows what the real baseline was? And I got shivers all over going, oh, this is what my childhood should have sounded like. I realize now that this is what it should have been. And that feeling has basically driven me forward to work in conservation. You know, I haven't worked here at NEP since then, but that was an extremely powerful experience. And even now, when you walk out there and I think I saw a leopard this morning, maybe an impala, you know, you feel like you're in the, you know, in the savannas of Africa. It's an incredible experience. And obviously you get a mix of people using the footpaths, you get a mix of people paying to come on safari, which becomes part of the business model, but getting people here has such a value. And it's not just here, it's obviously all of these projects. And Derek was saying the same when we were in you know, between Birmingham and Coventry last week or whenever it was. The power that these places have to engage the chimney pots and help them bring them along the journey is just incredible, really.
Brilliant. Well, we're coming towards the end of our session now, but what I'm hearing is rewilding's really good for nature. It's one of the key parts of the puzzle in solving the climate crisis, and it's really good for us too. So I'd like to close by inviting all the panelists to share one idea. So we've got lots of people gathered here this morning who all have an interest in rewilding. That's presumably why they rocked up to hear us all talk about it. What would be your kind of closing message, panelists? You know, what could everybody here do to help drive forward the rewilding movement? Simon, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Conversations. If you're here, you're listening to this, go and have a conversation with somebody, friends, family, people that you know. Spread the word. Conversations. And if I may, reading. Read up about stuff. Rebirding. Rewilding. Plug for Derek's book. There you go, Derek. Derek's book. Oh, there we go in the camera. Read around. Really interesting book, Braiding Sweetgrass, about interactions with nature. So read about, have conversations with the message that rewilding offers hope.
Super, thanks Simon. Pete, can we come to you?
Yeah, I'm just actually looking at the Scotland Big Picture website, because we have a headline that says what you can do. And there's three boxes, and I think they're all self-evident. Wild your space. In other words, rewild the space that you control. Make some noise. As Simon was alluding to, have discussions with friends, family, neighbours, work colleagues, and put your money to work. That's not just donating to rewilding charities, although obviously that's very welcome. It's about how you spend your money, the consumer choices that you make. So wild your space, make some noise, and put your money to work. They would be my three closing recommendations.
Thanks, Pete. Julian?
I would say, you know, after this, go outside if you've got a garden or a park or somewhere, and just spend a minute, or if you want to be ambitious, 10 minutes with just experiencing nature, and then hopefully taking away the benefits that it offers to you, and can offer to you every day. We really need to try and get across that people have a right to connect to the natural world. and we need to try and enable that right.
Thank you. Ivan?
Well, Derek said it earlier, do something. If you have a garden, let the grass grow, put a pond in. You can do stuff. And if it's bigger than a garden and you're worried about funding, look at the Rewilding Britain network, try and find local farmer groups, try and find out who's doing stuff in your area. If you're, action really, Helen, and everyone can do something. And if you don't have a garden, find a community group who does have one and get them to put pollinator mixes in. Just take some steps forward, because it'll make you feel good, and it is good for nature ultimately.
Yeah, do something. And last but not least, Derek, can we come to you?
I would say you need to understand your subject well. You need to do things. I thought there was a time for talking, and I'm just in life getting to the stage where the time for talking is mainly over. This is binary. When it comes, if you want an example of binary, you look at beavers, you look at the National Nature Conservation Authority in Scotland collaborating with the SU and the CLA to try and defeat a court case which suggested their killing was actually right. This is not always about talking. Sooner or later, it's going to be one way overcoming another. And we have to persuade people that our way is right and best, and that then the other way lies certain disaster. So it's talking good, but doing absolutely critical. And there is a time when there can be way too much talking.
Well, thanks everyone. I think that's a very clear call to action for us all. Let's just get on and do it, whether it's rewilding our garden, moving money into rewilding, talking to our friends and neighbours, reading about it. Let's get on and do it. Let's pass back to you, Lindsey.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was absolutely brilliant. Loads and loads of interesting questions coming in there. So we will try and pass the ones we didn't get to our panelists and pop some answers up online for you, along with a reading list, because I think there was a bit of a request for that. So I might be in touch with you, Simon, for another quick pass around those books. Just to let everybody know, we've got a little survey link that's in the chat there, if Gemma could repost that, and we will take your views on the festival. And please do stay connected to the festival. We've got loads of fantastic stuff coming up later today. We've got Life Without Coffee or Chocolate, which I think is an abhorrent idea, but talking to the team who are running a program out in Colombia about what it's like to live in a mega diverse country. And we've got Creator Buzz and Pollinator Pathmakers session with artist Daisy Ginsberg, who's talking about an amazing program she's got, where there's a website available called pollinator.art, where you could create your own pollinator space, which would be a fantastic way to do this rewilding kind of idea in a really small space. So we hope to see you later at the Festival of Discovery, and thank you all for your input. It's been brilliant.
Thanks everyone. Are panelists allowed to enter the giveaway to win Derek's book?
Of course, of course.
Brilliant.
Add to the 3 copies I have already.
Oh, yeah, no,
Brilliant.
I'll champion that. No, it's a fantastic book. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
It's been great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.